The mysterious lights beneath the waves. The early morning fog clung to the surface of the Atlantic Ocean, shrouding the coastline in a blanket of silence. Tom Miller stood at the edge of his small research vessel, carefully checking the diving gear laid out in front of him. The air was crisp, the kind of cool that promised a good day for diving. At 32 years old, Tom had spent more time beneath the surface of the ocean than most marine creatures had in their lifetime. For him, the sea was a second home, its cold embrace a constant reminder of the wonders it hid beneath. As a marine biologist, Tom's days usually revolved around collecting data from the depths of the ocean. His current project focused on how climate change was affecting the deep water creatures of the Atlantic. The research was vital, but it often meant long hours alone on the boat, traveling to remote areas of the coastline where few had ventured. Despite the isolation, he didn't mind. There was a certain peace in the rhythm of the waves, the gentle sway of the boat, and the endless horizon that seemed to stretch out forever. The boat, though humble, was equipped with everything Tom needed: reliable sonar equipment, sample containers, and, most importantly, his trusted diving gear. He ran his hand along the edge of the boat's deck, feeling the cool wood beneath his fingertips. The sun was beginning to rise, casting a warm orange glow over the water, painting the fog in hues of amber and gold. The promise of good visibility hung in the air. It was a perfect morning for a dive. Tom double-checked his equipment one last time, an old habit that had saved his life more than once. His oxygen tanks were full, the backup regulator was functioning properly, and the emergency beacon had been fully charged. His diving computer was calibrated, ready to guide him through the depths. He felt a surge of anticipation. Every dive was a new opportunity, a fresh adventure. As he strapped on his wetsuit and checked the dive knife clipped to his belt, Tom couldn't help but feel the familiar excitement build within him. Another day, another set of samples, he muttered to himself, though there was an edge of something more in his voice. It wasn't just the science that drew him in, it was the mystery of the ocean itself. Every dive brought new discoveries, new secrets waiting to be uncovered. The water temperature read 54 degrees Fahrenheit, 12 degrees Celsius. Cold, but nothing Tom couldn't handle. As he stood on the edge of the boat, the world around him seemed to pause, as though the ocean itself was holding its breath. The boat gently rocked, the only sound the soft lapping of the waves against the hull. Taking a deep breath, Tom stepped off the edge, his body sinking into the cool embrace of the sea. The water immediately enveloped him, and he felt the familiar calm that only the ocean could provide. Visibility was better than expected. The early morning light filtered through the water, casting everything below in a surreal glow. As Tom began his descent, he marveled at the clarity of the water, which stretched about 40 feet before it began to fade into darkness. The deeper he went, the colder and darker the water became, but his diving lights pierced the gloom, illuminating the world around him. He was used to this routine. Minus 120 feet down was his usual research depth. But today, something felt different. There was a sense of anticipation in the air, as though the ocean itself was about to reveal something new. At around 100 feet, Tom's eyes caught something unusual. A strange pattern of lights shimmered in the water ahead of him. At first, he thought it might be bioluminescent jellyfish, a common sight in these waters. But these lights were different. They pulsed with a steady rhythm, almost like they were moving with purpose. They glowed in shades of blue and green, casting an eerie light that seemed to draw him closer. "What the hell is that?" Tom thought, adjusting his diving light to get a better look. The pattern seemed to be coming from somewhere deeper, farther than his usual dive depth. His heart raced with excitement and curiosity. Every scientific instinct told him to stick to his planned route, to stay within the safety limits of his dive. Going deeper would mean less time at the bottom and greater risks. But something about those lights tugged at his curiosity. He glanced at his diving computer, checking his oxygen levels. He had enough air for a slight detour, but he would need to be cautious. The deeper he went, the more pressure there would be on his body, and the less time he would have to explore. But the lights, they seemed to call to him. Taking a deep breath, Tom adjusted his buoyancy and began his descent toward the source of the strange lights. With every foot he went down, the water grew colder, the pressure heavier. At 150 feet, the darkness of the ocean pressed in on him, the only light coming from his diving lights. The ocean felt vast and alien, as though he had entered a different world entirely. Then he saw it. Something large was thrashing in the water below him, creating swirls of bioluminescence around it. As he drew closer, Tom's heart skipped a beat. Entangled in what appeared to be a mess of fishing nets and discarded cables was a humanoid figure, a figure unlike anything he had ever seen. Its body was covered in scales that shimmered with an otherworldly glow, and its skin had a bluish tint, glowing faintly beneath the surface. It was clearly female, but not in any way that could be mistaken for a human. The creature's features were strange yet beautiful, large almond-shaped eyes that seemed to glow with an inner light, and delicate patterns pulsing beneath her skin, almost like bioluminescence. But what caught Tom's attention the most were the gill-like structures on her neck, struggling to process the water around her. In that moment, all scientific curiosity and caution faded away. Whatever this being was, she was in trouble. The fishing nets had ensnared her, wrapping around her legs and torso in a deadly embrace. Her movements were growing weaker by the second, and panic was evident in her large glowing eyes. Tom's training kicked in. It didn't matter who or what she was. What mattered was that she needed help. His hand moved instinctively to the diving knife clipped to his belt. He wasn't sure what he was about to face, but right now, the only thing that mattered was getting to her. Tom's mind raced with equal parts adrenaline and disbelief. He had never imagined he would be in a situation like this, but now that he was, he knew what he had to do. As he swam closer, he held up his hands in a gesture of peace, hoping the creature would understand. Her eyes locked onto his, her gaze filled with fear, yet also a flicker of hope. Tom slowly reached for the knife, his fingers trembling slightly as he moved toward the tangled mess of nets. The glow of her skin illuminated the area, casting an ethereal light as he worked to free her. This was no ordinary rescue. Tom knew that, but at that moment, he couldn't think about the ramifications of what he was doing. He could only focus on the task at hand, freeing this mysterious, helpless being from the trap that threatened her life. The struggle for freedom. Tom's hands moved swiftly as he cut through the thick tangle of fishing nets, each stroke of the knife careful and deliberate. His heart pounded in his chest, his breath coming in quick bursts through the regulator, as his mind tried to process what he was seeing. The creature in front of him, a humanoid with glowing blue skin, was not of this world. Yet here she was, trapped beneath the water's surface, struggling for her life. Every moment that passed, her movements grew weaker, and Tom could sense that time was running out. As his knife slid through another knot in the net, Tom's thoughts raced. What had he stumbled upon? Who? What was this being? His years of diving and studying marine life hadn't prepared him for this. Everything he knew about biology, about life, was being turned on its head. But he couldn't afford to think about that now. He couldn't afford to be distracted. The being before him needed help, and Tom was the only one who could offer it. The water around them seemed to pulse with an almost tangible energy, the eerie glow of the alien skin casting strange reflections across the tangled mess of nets. Each flash of light seemed to send ripples through the water, as if the ocean itself was reacting to the struggle unfolding below the surface. Tom's fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer intensity of the moment. He could feel the pressure mounting around him, the weight of the water pressing down on his body, but he pushed through it. This was a matter of life and death. He worked methodically, slicing through the nets one by one, but there were so many of them, wrapped around the alien's body like a vice. As he reached for the next knot, the alien's head jerked toward him, her eyes wide and pleading. There was no mistaking the desperation in her gaze. She couldn't survive much longer if she stayed trapped like this. The gills on her neck were fluttering erratically, struggling to process the water around her body growing weaker with each passing second. Tom's mind raced. He knew the risks of staying down too long. His oxygen supply was limited, and the pressure at this depth was starting to take its toll. But the thought of leaving her here, helpless, and on the brink of drowning, was unbearable. He couldn't do it. He had to get her free. "Hang on," he muttered, though he knew she couldn't understand him. His voice was muffled by the mask, but somehow the words felt important. He needed to reassure her, to reassure himself that he could save her. With renewed determination, he pressed on, his movements becoming faster and more urgent as he cut through the last of the netting. The water was now swirling around them, the light from his diving lamp catching on the glistening patterns on her skin, almost as though the alien was drawing energy from the surrounding darkness. Finally, with a sharp tug, Tom freed the last of the nets from her torso. Her body, now freed from the entanglement, floated listlessly in the water. Her breathing was shallow, her skin pale, and her eyes, though still wide, seemed clouded with exhaustion. She was barely conscious. Tom's mind flashed to all the emergency protocols he'd been trained in. He knew how to handle underwater rescues. He knew how to resuscitate divers who had run out of air, how to help those in distress. But none of those lessons had prepared him for this. This was something far beyond his experience, beyond anything he could have imagined. And yet here she was, and he couldn't leave her to die. He carefully reached out, his hand steady as he guided her to the surface. He adjusted his buoyancy to make sure they both ascended slowly, his dive computer beeping softly in his ear as it tracked their ascent. The alien's body was limp in his arms, her head resting against his chest, but her eyes fluttered open, locking onto his face. Her breathing was still shallow, but at least it wasn't labored anymore. Tom felt a strange sense of relief wash over him. He wasn't sure if he could explain it, but there was something almost intimate about the way she was clinging to him. It wasn't just a rescue. It felt like something deeper, something more personal. Perhaps it was the shared connection of life and survival, or perhaps it was the strange bond they had formed in the few minutes they'd been together. But Tom couldn't shake the feeling that he was witnessing something extraordinary. As they ascended, the water grew lighter, the deep, almost inky blackness beginning to fade into a soft, translucent blue. The surface of the ocean was just ahead, the hazy outlines of the boat above now visible. Tom's muscles were burning with the effort of keeping them both afloat, but he pushed through, determined to get her to safety. The surface broke with a sudden rush of bubbles and air, and Tom pulled them both into the boat's shadow. He kicked his legs, keeping them steady in the water, and looked up to see his vessel above him. There on the deck was the hand of his boat's winch, a lifeline. His heart raced again, not from the struggle of the dive, but from the sheer urgency of getting her out of the water. But the alien wasn't quite ready to be saved. Her eyes closed again, her breathing shallow, her body limp. The lifeline was out of reach, and Tom could only tread water, his mind racing through options. But as he looked at her once more, something shifted. Her eyes opened slightly, and though she could hardly keep them open, there was a flicker of recognition. She wasn't just a victim of circumstance. There was more to her, something more than what appeared. It was as if, in the brief moments they had shared in the water, she had found something in him. The flicker of recognition could have been the first sign of her understanding, and the sudden realization struck Tom that he had just saved someone, or something, that might very well change everything he knew about the universe. The depths were still calling, but Tom knew that the real journey was just beginning. Unspoken bonds and the dawn of discovery. The sun's first rays filtered through the mist, casting a soft, golden hue across the water as Tom Miller heaved the unconscious figure into the boat. He was exhausted, his body aching from the strain of the rescue, but there was a sense of triumph in the air, a quiet relief that filled the space around him. He had done it. Against all odds, he had saved her. But now, as he looked down at the alien figure lying in his boat, Tom realized that the real challenge was only just beginning. The creature, this alien, lay motionless on the deck, her bluish skin shimmering faintly under the early morning light. She looked fragile, more fragile than he had imagined when he first saw her. Her breathing, though shallow, was more stable now, and her gills no longer fluttered erratically. But her eyes remained closed, her features calm and serene in a way that made Tom uneasy. He couldn't help but wonder who, or what, she was. What had she been doing down there, trapped in the depths of the ocean? What had brought her to Earth, to the waters of the Atlantic? His mind was spinning with questions, but he forced himself to focus on the task at hand. He checked her pulse, noting its slow but steady rhythm. She was alive, and that was all that mattered for now. Carefully, Tom pulled off his wetsuit, his movements stiff and slow as the cold air bit into his exposed skin. He grabbed a blanket from the boat's storage and draped it over her, trying to keep her warm. He had no idea how long she had been underwater, but he knew the dangers of hypothermia. He needed to get her back to shore, to safety, and get her the help she needed. The boat rocked gently on the waves as Tom started the engine, the sound of the motor filling the silence that had settled between them. As he steered the vessel toward the coast, his thoughts kept drifting back to her, the alien he had saved. She wasn't from Earth. There was no mistaking that. Everything about her was foreign. Her skin, her eyes, her gills, and yet there was something hauntingly familiar about her, something human in her expression, in the way she had looked at him before slipping into unconsciousness. Tom's hands gripped the wheel tightly as the boat cut through the water, the wind whipping around him. The air was cold, and the ocean stretched endlessly ahead. But all Tom could think about was what had just happened, the incredible, impossible rescue, and what it meant. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had just stumbled upon something that would change the course of history, something that would alter everything he knew about life, about the universe. Minutes passed, or perhaps hours. It was hard to tell in the haze of his thoughts. But eventually, the boat neared the shore. The coastline appeared on the horizon, a dark silhouette against the rising light of the sun. As Tom pulled the boat closer to the dock, he noticed a group of fishermen gathered nearby, their boats lined up along the edge of the water. They were already preparing for their morning haul, oblivious to the extraordinary sight that had just unfolded in the depths. Tom's hands shook as he guided the boat into a small cove, carefully avoiding the rocks that jutted out from the shore. He had no idea what to do next. He wasn't a doctor, and certainly not an expert in extraterrestrial biology. But he knew that this creature, this alien, needed help, and he wasn't about to let her down now. With one last glance at the ocean, Tom killed the engine and hopped out of the boat, wading through the shallow water to reach the dock. He carefully lifted her from the boat, cradling her in his arms as though she were made of glass. The weight of her body against his felt both strange and natural at the same time. There was something comforting about holding her, even though he knew nothing about her, nothing about where she came from or what she was. The fishermen watched him as he approached the shore, their eyes widening in surprise at the sight of the alien in his arms. They murmured amongst themselves, but Tom barely heard them. His mind was consumed with one thought. He needed to get her to shelter, to safety. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. "Tom," a familiar voice called out. Tom turned to see his colleague, Dr. Emily Harris, hurrying toward him. Emily had been working with him on the marine research project for the past few years. She was a scientist, like him, but her expertise was in marine ecosystems and climate change. Tom had always admired her intellect and determination. But now, as she approached him, her face filled with concern, Tom couldn't help but wonder if she would believe what had just happened. "Is she?" Emily began, her voice trailing off as she looked at the alien in Tom's arms. Her eyes widened as she took in the sight. "I don't know," Tom replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I found her underwater. She's not human. She's something else." Emily didn't say anything at first, just stared at the alien in awe. But after a moment, she stepped forward, her professional demeanor returning. "We need to get her inside. Let's get her to the lab." Tom nodded, and together they carefully carried the alien into the small research facility nearby. Emily immediately set to work, gathering medical supplies and equipment. Tom stood by, watching helplessly as she checked the alien's vitals, her fingers moving quickly but with a sense of caution. Emily was methodical, precise, and Tom was grateful for her calmness in the face of the unknown. "What do we do now?" Tom asked, his voice filled with a mix of uncertainty and awe. "She's not from here. I'm sure of it." Emily paused for a moment, her eyes flicking to the alien's strange, glowing skin. "I know, but we need to figure out what she is, where she came from, and we need to make sure she's okay." Tom's thoughts raced again. The mysteries were only deepening, and the questions were becoming overwhelming. Who was she? What was she doing in the depths of the ocean? And how had she ended up there, trapped in the netting? But one thing was certain. He had just discovered something that could change everything. And the answers were out there, waiting to be found.